Hey guys, okay, so I'm sorry that I haven't been making videos as often as I would like, but hopefully this will at least prepare you for the exam and go over some things that were maybe not clear, or if you haven't had them in a while, will just be a nice refresher for genetics. So today I wanted to do just a quick refresher and a quick review of some of the kind of important vocabulary words, and maybe make some clarifications about stuff we went over in lecture. Okay, so one term you should obviously know is genes. Okay, so a gene is just a unit of inheritance. It's usually associated with some traits. So like Mendel's different genes he was looking at was flower color, pea, whether it was wrinkled or round peas, um, height of the plants, things like that, right? And an allele is just a version. Oops, allele, two L's, allele is a version of that gene. So if the gene maybe say was flower color, so one of the traits he looked at was flower color with the pea plants, and the alleles might be in his case was purple and white. Right, so these were two different alleles for the same gene, the same flower color gene. Okay, and what he found was when he crossed a purple flower, and he purebred them first, so that he was pretty sure that these flowers were only produced purple flowers, and he also purebred white flowers to make sure that they only produced white flowers. So when he crossed these flowers, what he found was all purple flowers. Okay, so in that first generation, crossing the purple and the white flowers, he only found purple flowers. Only purple flowers were produced. So that, first of all, was suggesting that this idea about blending wasn't going on. This idea that there was some fluid mechanism for how traits are inherited, and that they just blended together was not correct. Because otherwise, you would get some sort of light purple, right? So maybe lavender purple flowers. Okay, but this was not the case. And then when he selfed one of these flowers, he produced in that F2 generation, he produced some purple flowers, but then he also found that in selfing those purple flowers, he produced some white flowers as well, right, in about a 3-to-1 ratio. Okay, again, not always perfectly 3-to-1, but about a 3-to-1 ratio. So one of the things one of the conclusions he came to was that this idea about fluid inheritance was not what was working out, right, because this whole blending didn't kind of work out with these flower colors. And the other thing was that there was some sort of masking going on. One trait, this purple trait, right, this purple allele, was masking the effects of this white allele, right? And so he came up with this idea about dominance, right? So there was one trait that was dominant. It was masking the other effects of the other one. And the other one was recessive. Okay, so the recessive trait, for whatever reason, is being masked by the dominant trait. Okay, so again, in these flowers, right, in these purple flowers, you're getting this purple trait is masking whatever trait was passed down, this white trait that was passed down by this parent. So another term I want to bring up is genotype versus phenotype. Okay, so genotype. Okay, so the genotype is what genes are actually being passed down, right? What inheritance factor was being passed down. And Mendel figured, it makes sense that half of these traits come from your mother, and half come from your father, or in this case, half come from the purple flower and half come from the white flower. So you have pairs basically of each of these factors. So in this case, we'll use capitals for the purple, capital P's, and then little p's for the white flower, this recessive trait, right? So each flower has a pair, right, of inheritance factors, or genotype, right? This genotype is which kind of genes they get, right? So you can have the dominant genes or the recessive genes, right? And so in this first generation, if each of these offspring got one gene from the purple flower and one gene from the white flower, they would have one capital P, right, and one little p. Okay, and this would be the same across all of them, right? Because this one, the white flower, can only donate the white gene, and this purple flower can only donate the purple gene, right? Okay. So the other thing we want to bring up, the other term, is heterozygous. Heterozygous. Okay, so hetero means different, and zygous refers to zygote. So zygote is the same thing. Basically, is like an embryo. So it's a fertilized egg. It's an egg that has been fertilized by a sperm. Is a zygote, right? So it means that the genes that you have are different, right? You have one dominant, one recessive, and the other term is homozygous. Homo means same. Again, zygous means zygote. And you can be homozygous, so if you have the same genes, or the same alleles, you're homozygous. They're two of the same, right? So this would be homozygous dominant. This one would be homozygous recessive. Okay. All right. So you can see that the genotype, right? Whether you're heterozygous or homozygous, could be different, but you have the same phenotype. The phenotype is what actually physically shows, right? The physical trait. So in the case of the purple flowers, you could be homozygous dominant and be purple, or you could be heterozygous and also have purple flowers. Okay, so your genotype might be different, but you can also have the same. But you can have the same phenotype in these cases. In the cases of dominance and recessive. Okay. All right, so those are some good terms to know, right? So what's going on with this 3-to-1 ratio then? Why are we getting this 3-to-1 ratio given when you self this purple flower that's heterozygous? Okay, so I know a lot of you probably have had you have done Punnett squares in the past, but just to refresh you, so we know that this flower, like if we cross these two flowers, right? Each pea plant is going to pass on one of these alleles, right? But which one actually is passed on is random. Okay, so if we were to so basically, which one, if you want to think about which allele it could pass on, this flower could either pass on a dominant allele, right, or a recessive allele, and the same thing for this one. It could pass on a dominant or recessive. So what we do is to organize this, we make a Punnett square, which is just a way of organizing our thoughts, right? So we put one parent across the top and one parent on the side, right? So let's just put this one on the top. Okay, so this one could donate a large P, right? Or it could donate a small P, right? Or a recessive, the white gene, purple gene or white gene, right? And this one could do the same, right? Could donate a large the dominant purple trait, or it could pass on the small recessive white allele. Okay, and so again, because this is random, it's just a 50-50 chance. So if we were to figure out, okay, what are all the possible combinations, right? So you could have a homozygous dominant, you could have heterozygous, right? You could have another heterozygous, and you could have a homozygous recessive. Okay, so this is where this 3-to-1 ratio comes, right? So the genotype isn't 3-to-1, right? Actually, it's a 1% or 1 out of 4 chance that that offspring is going to be homozygous dominant, and 2 out of 4 chance that it's going to be heterozygous, right? But if you look at the phenotype, you have a 3 out of 4 chance, right? Each of these, 1, 2, 3 out of 4, are going to be purple, right? So 3 out of the 4 will be purple, right? Purple. And only 1 out of 4 chance of having white flowers, right? So this is what gives us our 3-to-1 ratio, just to clarify if you didn't know that before. Okay, so again, this is a pretty straightforward, what we call a monohybrid cross. So we're looking at basically what a cross. So we're looking at a cross between parents we're looking at one trait, right? That's where the mono comes in. We're looking at one trait, and in this case, we're looking at a hybrid, right? So heterozygous, a cross between two heterozygous parents, right? The parents are heterozygous for this one trait, okay? If we were maybe looking at what's called a dihybrid cross, we would be looking at two traits that are heterozygous. Okay, so let's say we were looking at two parents that were heterozygous for purple flowers and also heterozygous for round or wrinkled peas, right? Okay, so if we cross these two parents, right, we're looking at two traits now, and each trait, the parents are heterozygous, right? So to think about this, you'd want to, right, what are the parents going to pass down, right? First you have to think, what are the parents going to pass down? Well, they're going to pass down one of each of these alleles, right? So they're going to pass down one P, which is either going to be large or small, or they're going to be, dominant, recessive, or they're going to also going to pass down one R, right? One P and one R. So what are the different possible combinations, right? So each egg or sperm, or in this, in the case of the plants, egg and pollen, are going to have one P and one R, right? So what are the possible combinations? Well, it could be a big P and a big R, right? It could be a big P and a little r, and it could be a little p and a big R, or a little p and a little r, right? So there's 4 possible combinations of p's and r's that each parent could pass down, right? And this is the same. So here what you would do, you just arrange your Punnett square. It would be a bigger square, right? But you'd arrange your Punnett square so that one is across the side and one is across the top, and you'd fill everything else. And then you would have, instead of having a 3-to-1 ratio, right, because it's not just one trait that you're looking at, you actually would want to see, how many have, purple flowers and round peas. You'd want to see how many have purple flowers and wrinkled peas, and how many have white flowers and round peas, right? So if we think about the different genotypes, and we also would want to see how many have white flowers and wrinkled peas. So I will let you guys, oops, that's a D, sorry. I'll let you guys figure that out. What's the ratio between purple and round, purple and wrinkled, white and round, and white and wrinkled? Right off the top, you can guess, okay, how many possible combinations are there? Well, if this was to make a square, it would be 4 by 4, so it's going to be something out of 16. So you guys can work through that, figure out these ratios for yourselves, and this is basically what Mendel did, right? Okay, and he found, again, remember, Mendel found that this is assuming, remember, that these are not linked, right? That these traits are independent of one another. Whether you have purple flowers and round peas is not going to be, more likely than having purple flowers and wrinkled peas, right? Okay, so this is assuming independence. This is assuming that each of these combinations is equally as possible, right? Okay, and again, we went over, when that is not the case in lecture, but I'm not going to go into that. Okay, so we went over a lot, and I just wanted to make one clarification. I know a lot of people were getting confused. Okay, so with some of the things that were talked about in lecture, and one of the major things was people have been asking me questions is, what is up with, we were talking about hair color and eye color, right? We talked about Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez, and we were talking about, like, what hair color would their children have, and we were saying it was not as straightforward as Mendel's pea plants, right? It's so the question is, why is that not the case? And also we are also introduced to something called incomplete dominance. So I'll go to where we have the red and white roses, which make pink roses. So I'll go over those. Okay, so why don't all traits kind of follow Mendel's expectations, right, of dominant and recessive? So let's talk about these in the case of incomplete dominance. There's 2 possible answers for why traits don't kind of follow Mendel's rules. And there's actually a couple, but we'll go over the ones that we talked about in class. So one was incomplete dominance. Okay, whoops, sorry about that. Dominance. Okay, so in the case of incomplete dominance, one trait doesn't actually mask another. In this case, with the roses, actually they mix together. So actually, the phenotype looks like blending, right? So we were introduced to this idea about, okay, so we had, okay, what happens when you get a red rose, and sorry for my sad rose drawing, and a white rose, right? And you cross them. Well, if it followed Mendel's expectations, right, of complete dominance, where one masks the other, we'd expect that either all the offspring would either be red or white, right? But in fact, what we got was pink roses. Okay, so you were saying, well, isn't this blending? What's going on here? It looks like blending, right? So it looks like the red and the white is mixing together to make pink, right? But if we were to go one step further and mate one of these pink flowers with another pink flower, we would actually get some pink flowers, right? We get some pink roses. But we'd also get some red roses and some white roses. Okay, so here, if we had gone one step further and actually mated or crossed some pink flowers together, we would have gotten some red and white roses out of that. So okay, so let's think about how does this work. So again, even though it looks like blending, it follows. It's actually particulate inheritance, right? You can pull these red and white traits back out of this pink rose, right? So to kind of think about what the genotype is, right? Right now we're looking at the phenotype. To look at what the genotype is, let's, instead of using capitals and lowercase letters, because that doesn't really work, let's use just R's and W's, straight R's and W's. Okay, so R for red, right? So this one would be big R, assuming that we purebred it, right? And this one would be WW. Okay, so if we cross the red roses with the white roses, what would we get? We would get, in the genotype, we get one R and one W, okay? So here, that's the genotype of this pink rose, right? And if we cross two pink roses, okay, so each of these pink roses is heterozygous, right? So if we did a monohybrid cross and cross the pink roses, we would get, so lo and behold, we would get some red roses, we'd get some pink roses, and we'd get some white roses, okay? So if we had done one more cross, we would have seen that even though it looks like blending, and the phenotype definitely looks like there's blending going on, it's actually not, remember, because blending inheritance is assumed that the mechanism behind it was fluid, right? That fluids were mixing together, that the hereditary unit was some sort of fluid that mixed together, right? But here we can see that it's not fluid, it's particulate, because you can pull these red and white traits back out, right? And by doing this monohybrid cross, we can see where those come back out, right? Okay, and then the other thing I'll finish up with is the question about, okay, so sorry about that. So if we're not talking about incomplete dominance, we're talking about, like, there's cases where, like my dad is really tall, right? And my mom is quite short, right? My dad's like 6 foot something, and my 6'2", and my mom's like 5'2", right? And I'm about 5'6", right? So this looks like blending, right? So what's going on here? Or, we talked about how eye color doesn't exactly follow Mendel's, dominant and recessive inheritance, right? So in this case, in the cases of traits that look phenotypically that look like they're blending, a lot of times it's because there's multiple genes controlling them, right? And there might be multiple things controlling them. Like, you think about your height, what sorts of things might control your height? Well, it's, it might depend on how much growth hormone you produce, or how much, how dense your bones are. There's multiple genes having different effects on your height, which all kind of add up together to give you your height, right? So if there's multiple genes kind of that might affect height, or pigmentation, there's multiple genes that can affect hair color and eye color. So what happens is they have all their effects add up together to create your phenotype, right? Plus, especially in the case of height, right, there's also environmental factors. So the phenotype can be a little more complex than what Mendel was used to studying, and we'll go into that in later classes. Okay, so hopefully that cleared up some confusion with the whole roses and Justin Bieber examples, and the real take-home message from that was, even though things look like they're blending, what Mendel really found was, okay, what's really going on is particulate inheritance, right? So even though the phenotype might look like there's blending going on, the unit of inheritance is some particle. Okay,